All right, folks, those of you that are here. Yeah, it tends to happen right when final projects start. Good morning, Calgary. Hopefully all of you are there as well. Um, so, uh, big day. Very big day. Because you're done with curriculum. You're done with activities. You're done with the projects that keep having new features that pop up every day. Now you get to be at the point where you get to demonstrate the sum of your knowledge that you've been working for the past 7.5 weeks to accumulate. That's kind of a cool place to be, because now you're at the point where you want to put it all together and you want to show that you can genuinely build a product from start to finish. There's a few things coming into final projects that are really common. One is to be absolutely convinced that you can't do it. It's too big, it's too hard. You don't know enough, you haven't practiced enough, you need to go back and review things. And what you want to remember is that the way that you're going to be programming, this week and the way that you're going to be programming 2 weeks from now when you have demo day are very different. Keep in mind that 2 weeks ago, you didn't really know React that well. 2 weeks ago, you were just coming back from your reading week. You hadn't even touched Rails yet, hadn't even seen Ruby yet, and you've learned a lot in 2 weeks. That means over the next 2 weeks, as you're working on this project, you're only going to get better. And so that means that you're going to find that probably even some of the things that you build this week, you're not going to like by the time that you do demo day. And that's just something that you want to kind of accept, because that's part of being a dev. There's no worse developer than you in the past. If you want something fun to do, go back and look at your code from week 1. See how you feel about yourself then. It's actually a good ego boost. That, and you look at it and you're like, oh my God, who wrote that? Did they have a head injury, a heroin habit? Like, what was going on there? So I didn't do the project planning lecture for you guys for your midterms. I think Joel did that one. And what I'm going to take you through is going to be similar, but it's going to go into a lot of depth on a number of points. And I'll go ahead and tell you that this kind of gets affectionately referred to as the sermon, because I get preachy. It's a topic I'm really passionate about. I can literally say I wrote the book on it. Yes? Yes. Ardelia gets a free pass. Eric, not so much. Yeah, you can. I do have copies. They're $10. I'll even sign it. Yeah, this is something I'm particularly passionate about because I have seen so many teams, so many companies fail in this process. And I will tell you that while I am dogmatic about a few things, this is not the only possible way to do it. It's just a way that if you do it, like showing up on time, it works and makes things better. Actually, let me get out Slack so that if Calgary talks to me, I can actually see it. That would be considerate and nice of me. There we go. Calgary, you are up on my phone and ready to go. You've probably been campaigning for a few days to build teams and get ideas together. Some of you may have even gone so far as showing up to class. No, some of you may have gone so far as to probably start building some things, maybe even start some initial code. And what I'm going to advocate is for a very front-loaded process where you do a lot of work ahead of time before you ever put hands on keys. And the reason that you want to do that is because it's going to keep you from having to rebuild parts of your app. That's one of the biggest things that kills your motivation, is when you have to go back and redo something. The other thing that my planning system tends to avoid is those moments in the 11th hour where, as a team or as a developer building a side project or whatever the case may be, you're forced to look at yourselves and say, oh crap, I suddenly need a whole new X, whether that's a page or a module or a library or whatever it may be, a whole new feature in some cases, because I didn't plan properly. A lot of people, when they start to build something, the instinct is to put hands on keys and type. That's how we as developers solve problems. We write code. But there's a lot of planning that if you do it and do it well, when you sit down to code, it's actually just a breeze because you have a clear, unadulterated path as to what needs to be done and whose responsibility it's going to be to do it. So let's start from the very beginning. You're going to start with an idea. And this is the one place in all of software development where it is okay to say, wouldn't it be cool if? Because we all have those moments. Oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was an app that did something? Wouldn't it be cool if there was an app where we could, have an ice cream truck finder, or, it would show us the nearest yoga gym that used patchouli as its scent, or whatever it might happen to be that we needed. And then there's the other formula that people use a lot, which is let's build X for Y. We're going to build Uber for food, or we're going to build Foodora for Uber, or Tinder for cats, or whatever it may happen to be, that we take some existing archetype of an app that we know, some workflow that we know well, and we transpose it onto some other demographic. Right now, one of the things that's considered a holy grail is to be able to build a LinkedIn for doctors, because doctors don't use LinkedIn, but that would suddenly be this great sales and recruiting tool for pharmaceutical companies and big medical like HMOs down in the States and stuff like that. And doctors could care less. So that's an example of taking an existing model and trying to apply it to a new demographic. And lots of people have tried and failed. And it's great that we're starting here, and this is how we as humans tend to conceptualize our idea at the very beginning. This is what gets us excited. But what we're talking about is data. In every single case, when you pop up one of those ideas, you're talking about data. Your data is your product. So when I say that I want an ice cream truck finder, what I'm really saying is if I had access to the data of where all the ice cream trucks were in the Lower Mainland, I could find the ones closest to me. If I'm talking about LinkedIn for doctors, I'm saying if I had the contact and resume information for all the doctors in North America, I could find out, I could get them to connect together and show correlations and see who's worked where and, who's influenced other people. That would be really cool. And that's the cool part of having access to that data. If you've ever used one of the TransLink apps, what makes them cool is that TransLink gives you access to the GPS data for all the buses and SkyTrains in the system. They all report GPS data like every 10 seconds or something like that. So you can get access to that, which means you can see where your bus is and why it's late. But without the data, you have no product. And I don't remember, early on in the course, did I tell you guys my tweet bookogram story? No? Okay. Well, just to remind, little wizard that hates social media, and he waves his wand and he makes the app go away. Yeah. App will get rebuilt. It survives. They've got the data to build the features on top of. But if we get rid of the data, the features stop mattering. If we get rid of the data, the product is dead. Because what makes people use the product is the access to that data. We have to figure out what benefits them. So there's 3 questions you can ask yourself to be able to nail down your data needs. What is the data that you can access or acquire? Are you going to get it from an API? Are you going to get it from users typing it in? Are you going to download it from somewhere? Is it coming from a file or an archive? Where is the data going to come from? If you don't know this, none of the rest matters. Doesn't matter which language you're coding in, doesn't matter what cool library you want to use, doesn't matter if you want to use D3 on the front end. It all stops mattering if you don't have any data to work with. Second, can you correlate that data to something else? This is what makes a product. Individual data points are not sexy. They're not interesting. They're not even usually informative. If I tell you that it's 10 degrees outside, that gives you that single data point, but it doesn't tell you that it's 10 degrees now, but it was 3 degrees this morning, and it's warmed up a lot. Doesn't tell you that it's 10 degrees now and roughly the same temperature it was yesterday. And it certainly doesn't tell you that it's 10 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning in October. That's a correlation. That's a correlation that suddenly makes that individual data point way more interesting, way more compelling. Going back to the ice cream finder, knowing that an ice cream truck is at the corner of, let's say, Dunsmuir and Richards is very, great. I have that piece of information. It is informative, just that little bit. But knowing that that's like, 2 blocks that way means that now that ice cream truck is close to me, it's correlated to my location, and I can go get a dilly bar. So I'm happy now. Without that correlation, all I have is just some random free-floating bit of information. Then the last question is, how can I pivot that data to add value? What is the unique presentation of that data that is going to make my app have the value of even having that data in the first place? So what makes this valuable is I can put a pin in a map and show how close it is to me. I can, do some quick little math that will tell me that it's 700 meters from my location, or whatever the distance might be. That's something, that's a distance I might be willing to walk in order to go get that ice cream bar. So how I'm going to present the data now becomes a key point. And in order for us to understand where that value is coming from, we have to understand this balance. And this balance is important because users don't pay for features. And when I say pay, I mean money or time. You're not going to spend any time in an app just because it has cool features. You don't pick an app because of a slick drop-down menu. You don't pick an app because the developer chose a particular library. You don't even pick an app because it's Material UI over like Bootstrap. Those are features. You pick an app because it benefits you. And the benefit has to be something that makes you, actually kind of makes it worthwhile to add that into your routine. And the benefits can be measured against this list. These are called the universal values. It's borrowed from both psychology and marketing. And the universal values tell us the 4 things that drive every single decision we make. The clothes we wear, the food we eat, the music we listen to, literally everything that we do is driven, bless you, by one of these 4 values. So we want to look good. We want people to think that we are smart and interesting and capable and accomplished and attractive and funny and talented and all the good positive adjectives that we could ever have all in one pile. That's what we want other people to think about us based on our choices. We also want to feel good. When we get up and look in the mirror in the morning, bless you, we also want to feel all those things about ourselves. What's interesting is that we will do things to look good that don't make us feel good. We'll also do things to feel good that don't make us look very good. One of those is called integrity. I'll let you figure out which one. We also want to save time. And time's the one thing we actually don't know how much we have. And so if we can find something that gives us more time to do other stuff that we enjoy, we're going to take it. Nobody invented escalators because stairs were efficient. And last but not least, we want to save money. And money is not just cash in the bank, it's also our resources. It's the gas in our car, it's the food in our pantry, it's the clothes in our closet. The resources that we have worked to accumulate, we want to conserve those. So if your app touches on one of these 4 things, provides one of these 4 benefits, it's something people will use. And that means that when you're deciding on what features you want to bring into your application, when you're deciding how you want to present the data that you have access to, you've got to understand what benefit it's going to have for a user. Because if it doesn't benefit the user, then you're building it for you, and nobody's going to be interested. Plain and simple. So I have what I cheesily call the trifecta of planning, mostly because I found this cool 3-pointed Celtic image. But it's also because there's 3 really big categories of planning that if you do them, you will have a positive outcome. Like I said, this isn't the one true way, you must do it only this way, but I will say that 100% if you do it this way, it does work. And I've proven that over and over again. It starts with user stories. Now hopefully, when you guys were doing your midterm project planning, you got introduced to user stories. Because user stories are how you describe each feature you're going to build. So I advocate using this format. And this format gives us a user story, a user scenario, and the metadata that's associated with building this feature. So this is from an article that was posted on Medium where somebody proposed this particular framework. And I'll send you guys the link. But what they did was they combined up here at the top, the as a user, I want to save a story I'm reading because I found it useful. That's the traditional user story. It tells us the role of the person using the application. It tells us the action that they want to do. And it gives us the motivation. What's the benefit of doing that thing? Now, this can be phrased as a blank I want to, as a blank I don't want to, as a blank I should be able to, or I should not be able to. We can phrase it any one of those 4 ways. If you're using the shoulds, those are entitlements. For example, as a user, I should be able to edit my profile because I want to curate my own, image for others. So that's the traditional user story. Then we have the user scenario, given, when, then. And given, when, then gives us the user experience. Given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories, and then we tack on this and statement, which gives us the feedback loop. It closes that loop of notification so that we know that what we did was a success or a failure. So then save it to my saved stories and alter the icon to indicate success. The info section down here at the bottom is where you would link in, for example, the bookmark icon, the wireframe that shows where this button's going to be, the mock-up from InVision or whatever tool you might have used to set up the UX. You may want to list your routes down here. You may want to list what tables this is going to touch down here. You may want to list what library, the codes, what module the code for this is going to be in. All of that is possible to do down here in the info section. And this, of course, is talking about Medium.com itself. This is describing a feature on Medium. Now, the reason this is powerful is if I were to write this on a Trello card, for example, and I was to hand it to, Eric or Benji or Mandy, anybody in the room, you would be able to look at this and know, well, okay, there's going to be an icon there, and I'm going to have to bind a click action to it somehow. And when that click happens, I'm probably going to send like an AJAX post request to create a new saved story. So there's going to be an endpoint, which is going to take the ID of the story in, grab the current user, add an entry to the table. It's going to respond, if it's an AJAX, it's just going to respond with a success message. And when the code on the front end gets the success message back, then it's going to change the SRC on the image so that the image looks different. You now know how to build this. I've described it for you from start to finish. So you now know how to build this. Everything that comes after this is literally you just putting your hands on the keys, because you're going to have the wireframe so you know where the button is going to go. You're going to have the route that that is actually you're going to post to for that AJAX call. You're going to have everything you need to be able to do that. Now, you're going to build a user story, I advocate, for every feature that you intend to deliver. and you got 2 weeks to build features, 15 days. That's potentially a lot of features. Really, really good teams have delivered up to like 1.5 to 2 features a day on the average. So if you come out of your planning session with 25 or 30 features spec'd out, it's not too many. But there's 2 things that you need to do when you are dealing with your features. One of them is check your watch. The other one is you want to take the whole set of features that you have delivered, and you want to have the ones that are your MVP. That's what you're going to deliver. That's what has to be in your app for it to prove its case. And then there's going to be some stretch goals. Stretch goals are great to have because there are things that you don't know yet. So they may take up time and keep you from getting to the stretch goals. They may be things that you can just sail right through and you end up with extra time and you get to start pulling some of these extra features in. But of those features that you commit to, there's one that's going to be the aha moment. There's one feature that's going to be the one that when you deliver it, when somebody sees that feature work, the light bulb is going to go off for them. They're going to have that aha moment that this is a cool thing. This is an app that gives a benefit. This is something I would want to use. If your app doesn't have an aha moment, you're in trouble. There needs to be something that as you're using it, that you're just like, oh yeah, okay, this is great. This is why I would want to keep using this. So this is something you need to identify out of the list of features that you plan to deliver. That Trello card gets a little star or a yellow label or something like that, because that's the one that as a team, that's the contract that you have to deliver. Everything else ends up being in support of that one. And this typically comes from the language that you used at the very beginning that started with, wouldn't it be cool if? Which, by the way, at this point in the process, are the 5 most dangerous words in software development. Anybody ever heard of the Widow Winchester Mansion? It's in San Jose, California. There's a really bad movie about it. Actually, a couple bad movies about it. I don't know why somebody can't make a good movie about it. So, late 1800s, Sam Winchester of Winchester rifle fame passed away. R.I.P. Very, very wealthy man. Left his wife a gigantic fortune. In 1880s dollars, it was like $27 million, which today is close to about $750 million. So she was very, very wealthy. Unfortunately, she was also what I can only politely call batshit crazy. Because she believed that she was haunted by the ghosts of all the people that had been killed by her husband's rifles. And she, as was the fashionable thing to do at the time, spent a lot of time visiting psychics and mediums and spiritualists. And for the purposes of the story I'm about to tell, I will point out that this one particular medium that she liked to visit, her husband was a general contractor. This becomes important very quickly. So one time, Sarah Winchester visited this medium. The medium channeled the spirit of her husband, and her husband had instructions for her about how to escape the ghosts, things he had learned from the other side. And what he told his wife was that she needed to start building a house and never stop building it because it would trap the ghosts. Once again, conveniently, this medium who was channeling, we weren't there, we don't know, channeling the dead husband, the husband of the medium was a general contractor. So convenient on how the work got started to go quickly. But Sarah Winchester then spent the rest of her life adding on to this house with no rhyme, no reason, no plan, just told developers to build. Just build onto the house. And so there are wings of the house that aren't connected to the rest of the house. You have doors that open onto blank walls and windows that open up into rooms. There's one third floor door that opens up and just to a third floor drop. There's all kinds of weird stairs that go up into the ceiling and just stop. Interestingly, now the house is a 4-story house. It used to be 7, but 3 of the stories fell down in an earthquake in the 1920s, thanks to the great workmanship. But there's over 40 bathrooms in the house, only one of which works, because she believed that the ghosts were going through the plumbing. And so they were all decoys, because that's not what you would want flying up out of the toilet when you're trying to use it. So yeah, only one of them works, and that one was for her. The reason I tell this story is not just to make fun of old dead people who had mental health issues. It's to point out that if you don't have a plan, you're just going to keep adding things on. And you will have the web app equivalent of stairs that go up into the ceiling and windows that open up onto nothing. And having that plan is critical. So don't build yourself a Winchester mansion. Make sure that the features you are building have a purpose. Now, I said this a minute ago, and I'll say it again. These are the 5 most dangerous words, because when you start planning out the features of your app, you start saying these words again, because you start having ideas and you start being able to build upon them. And I've actually been told that it's against HR regulations to pass out spray bottles to students, so that as you are planning, as soon as someone on your team says, wouldn't it be cool if, somebody can just be like, tss, and stop you. The answer to this is always yes at this point. Yes, it would be cool. With an infinite amount of money and an infinite number of developers and all the time in the world, yes, all of those features that you can come up with would be really cool. And it would be cool, and we would have crystal castles in the sky that, rainbows and unicorns down, bouncing back and forth. But you can't do that. You've got 15 days. And in boot camp time, that's like forever. That's like, 2 years of university or something like that. But you do have to limit yourself, and you have to make sure that you are not biting off more than you can chew. So be really careful with these words when you are starting to pick features. Now, when you're picking features, that MVP matters because you want it to be feature complete. It has to be something that demonstrates the whole of what you want that product to be and to do. Don't worry, Nick, I'll just come in and talk over Joel later on. But here's the key feature. You have to ship a product. There is a very clear deadline. 15 days from now, you're going to be standing in this room in front of all your friends, your family, your peers, people that don't know you, people that would like to know you, and most importantly, people that you would probably like to hire you, and you're going to show them what you've built. There is a deadline. You have to ship a product. And this is a real world thing. When you are working in a dev shop and the client says it's going live on November 25th, then no matter what, doesn't matter whether you had bugs or not, doesn't matter whether you had trouble learning a library, that product has to go live on November 25th. So feature complete is a really important thing, so you have to make sure that you are budgeting your time correctly. And one of the hardest things for devs to do at any level, whether you have been coding for 7.5 weeks or 6 millennia, is estimating how long it's going to take to build something. We call that scoping most often. And scoping is hard because you're always leaning towards the positive and always hoping that the negative doesn't happen. The other thing that comes up here when we talk about the app being feature complete is at this point in your passage through the boot camp, you have to now ask yourself the very important question of what does done mean, both for you individually as a developer and for the team that you're working on. What does done mean? When is the code done enough? Is it when you get it to run the first time and you're like, okay, it works, I'm never touching it again? Is it when you have gotten it to run, you refactored it, you've benchmarked it, you've written tests against it, you've tried edge cases, you've tested it on 3 other people's machines? Is it done then? Is it done when you have, only when you've refactored it so far down that it's almost illegible, but it runs, perfectly now? Is that what done means for you at that point? Each one of you is going to have the uncomfortable discussion with yourself and the slightly uncomfortable discussion with your team of what does done mean. How much time are you willing to invest in refactoring something, bug fixing, and chasing things down before you're going to call each feature done? And that's a conversation you're going to have with yourself as a developer, iteratively, recursively even, for the rest of your career, forever. You're always going to have that battle of what does done mean. And so now's the time to start practicing that. Now's the time where, as a team, you decide how far you're willing to take something before it becomes a rabbit hole. How much time, and I would advocate that when you start speccing out delivering the features, put a time box on them. This is not going to take any more than 2 days, no matter what. This one will be done in 6 hours, and if it's not done in 6 hours, it goes into the stretch goals. Being willing to have those kinds of conversations with yourself, personally, and as a team, is huge. So, you're not ready to code yet, but you need to talk about deployment. Because deployment is going to affect every other decision you're going to make from the rest of your planning. Midterm was pretty easy. It was localhost 3000 or Heroku. Now, if you choose to deploy, you have many, many, many options. Now, I want to be really, really clear. Lighthouse does not require anyone to deploy their app in any way, shape, or form. If you choose to do that, that's up to you. You've already spent enough money to be here. We're not going to mandate that you have to spend more. However, a lot of teams tend to take this opportunity to do it so that they get the experience doing it. And if you're going to deploy it, there's a whole bunch of really good options that are super cheap. DigitalOcean, $5 for a month. Amazon, if you put it on AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform or any of the cloud hosters, you might get charged $5 in a month, maybe. Linode is a lot like DigitalOcean, and you can still totally just demo off of localhost 3000, and no one is going to have a single negative thought about it. Don't think that you're not going to be in the cool kids club if you don't deploy. What matters is the quality of the product you build, not the technologies behind it. If you do choose to deploy, you're probably going to buy a domain name, unless you're just going to deploy it to an IP address, and that's just the way it's going to be. If you are buying one, you can expect to pay between $4 and $35. Again, we do not mandate this. It is entirely up to you. If you do choose to do it, it is excellent experience. The whole process of going through, registering with a registrar, pointing the name servers at the right place, setting up that hosting, and then getting, I want breakfast delivery, damn. Yeah, getting everything set up so that you have that first wonderful moment that you type in the domain name and your app pops up. That's an awesome moment. But keep in mind that if you do buy a domain name, it's a 1-year commitment minimum. You're going to own that domain name for a year, even if you only use it for the next 15 days. The other thing is when you buy the domain name, depending on which registrar you buy it from, you will have the option for something called domain privacy. I highly advocate you spend the extra $11 if you're going to do it and pay for the domain privacy, because what will happen otherwise is you will get hundreds of emails from very well-respected organizations, just ask them, they'll tell you, that will offer to build your website for you. They have a long history of building excellent WordPress, Magento, and Joomla products, and although they are an overseas company, they still deliver North American quality. So all you have to do is just schedule a Skype call with them and they can build your product. Very, very effective and inexpensive as well. They'll even call you on the phone at all hours of the day to offer this service to you. A year ago, I had a great idea. I was on a flight to London, and I had this just really good idea for something. So I built an API while I was on the flight and registered the domain name. And target practice, as I was going through and clicking things, I just missed the domain privacy thing when I was checking out. Between the airport and my hotel in London, which was about an hour's train ride, I had already gotten 47 email messages. Like, the domain had just been registered, and I had gotten 47 emails offering these services. And of course, my phone didn't work over there, but when I got back, there were like 14 voicemails, some of which had come in at like 1 in the morning, of people just like, oh, we would love to provide this service to you. We're great developers. We love doing this for people. And it's part of our industry, unfortunately. So turn on domain privacy is the moral here. Okay, so you know now what features you're going to build. You've committed to a set of features. You've committed to some stretch goals. You've committed to whether or not you're going to deploy your app and buy a domain name. You've got those decisions firmly made. The next decision you need to make is, how are you going to store your data? Because again, this is one of those fundamental choices that when you make it now, it affects all the other tech decisions that you're going to make. So you want to choose a database. And again, for the midterms, it was pretty easy. You were using Postgres. Maybe SQLite, but probably Postgres. So you were using SQL. Now, there's no handcuffs. You can use anything you want. So sure, you can go with something like Postgres, SQLite, MySQL, Percona, MariaDB, Microsoft SQL. If you want to pay $8,000 for an Oracle license, go for it. It's entirely up to you which SQL database you want to go to, work with if you have relational data. You may decide that you want to beef up your NoSQL skills, so you may go with something like Mongo or Couch or Redis or CockroachDB or any of the other 100 NoSQL databases that are out there. You may decide you want to be totally avant-garde, you're going to use a graph database, and you're going to use Neo4j. It's free. Why not, right? Two things I'll tell you is, don't choose something that's new just because it's new. Choose something that is a technology that you either want to get much better with or you want to build skills with because you think it's going to directly impact your career. The other thing I'll say is that if you are going to choose a new technology, now is the safe time to do so. You have the support of mentors. There isn't a salary dependent on your ability to deliver this product, to some client's spec. You're the one defining the spec. So if you want to work with Couch or Redis or Mongo or something that you're not feeling totally comfortable with, or you want to try a different flavor of SQL just to try something different, you want to do something exotic like Neo4j, or you want to use like a hosted database, something like DynamoDB from Amazon or Firebase from Google, Parse Server, any of those. If you want to use something like that, now is the safe time to do it. And I encourage you to explore, but I want to just add the caution to not to choose something different just because it's different. What is going to matter most at the end of the day to employers is the quality of the product you deliver. If you feel like making a non-standard choice here is going to affect your ability to deliver a quality product, then you may want to go with something more traditional. If you feel like, no, our team really feels like we can take that next step and do something advanced, then something different out of this list might be the right choice for you. But you have to make that decision now because it affects your technology choices. It affects the libraries that you're going to choose and potentially might even influence which programming language you decide to build in. So, second piece of the trifecta, and I'll talk about this one and then we'll take a break, is your ERD. And I say ERD talking about SQL, but I really mean the bigger, broader topic of data design. It does not matter which type of database you're going to use. You still have to put thought into the data that you are going to collect. It is imperative that you have an idea of what schema you're going to start with. So there's a couple of pieces of advice about doing data design that I like to give. The first is that models are nouns. Your data models aren't just like active record models. Your data models are, if I go and do a select star from users query, what am I going to get back? That's a data model. How is that data going to be modeled? Am I going to take that data and pump it into some other object or class or function that is going to give me extra abilities with my user? If that's the case, you need to design that now. You need to think about things like callbacks and data validations and what type of data each field is going to have. But guess where you get the nouns from? Your user stories. As a user, noun. I want to save a story, noun, that I'm reading because I found it useful. Given that I'm reading a story, same noun. When I tap the icon to save a story, same noun, then save it to my saved stories, new noun. I now know 3 different tables or 3 different collections or 3 different ways to model my data that I'm going to have just based on this one feature. I know I'm going to have users, I know I'm going to have stories, I know those stories have to be associated with a user if they're saved. How I choose to represent that in my database, I decide that. But I know that to fulfill this feature that I planned out, I need those 3 ways to model that data. And that's off of one user story. Imagine if I had 25 user stories and I swept through and collected all the nouns that I was going to need and could start drawing lines showing where the relationships are. I now know how my data is related to each other. I can now even make a better decision now about which database I might want to use because I know more about my data at this point. You might even want to go through and do the data modeling first and then pick a database, because that might influence your decision. If you were planning to use Mongo, but you suddenly realize that everything is super heavily relational in your app, that might be a reason to go back and choose SQL and have it be the right choice. At the end of the day, you can store the data however you want. But the second really big piece of advice I want to give you is to store the data the way you're going to query the data. So, for example, as a user, I want to save a story I'm reading. Well, the user is select star from users where ID equals whatever, and the story, select star from stories where ID equals whatever. That's how I'm going to pull this data out if I'm thinking about it in SQL. You know, if I'm thinking about it in Mongo, db.find1, or db.users.find1, ID is something, or db.stories.find1, and ID is something. That's how I'm going to pull that out. How am I going to save the story? Well, that depends on how, what my engine is in the back end. I might make a table called save stories that has a primary key, a user ID, and a story ID. I might, if it's Mongo, I might add a key to each user that is an array of story IDs that are saved on that user. Different ways that I could do it, but I should be storing my data the way I intend to query it. And that will save you a lot of grief. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break now. We'll pick up from here in 10 minutes. Okay, diving back in. When we left off, we knew what we were going to build. We knew why. We knew where we were going to host it when we demoed it. And we also knew roughly how we were going to store the initial data. Now, that initial schema is not engraved in stone. It can, will, and probably should change, but it gives you a place to start from. Now the question is, how do we decide what code we're going to use moving forward? And so this is where we start asking ourselves questions like, which language would I like to code in? Which language is my team going to feel productive with? Again, for the midterm, it was nice and easy. It was JavaScript, plain and simple. But since then, you've learned Ruby. You might have liked Rails. I'm willing to keep that option open for people. But the truth is, there are no restrictions on what you build your final project in. If you wanted to do it all as COBOL, by the way, don't do that. But you could. Python, PHP, Java. If you want to learn Go, if you decide now is the time for you to learn Erlang or Haskell or whatever craziness, no. That was you, Spencer. No. I need that squirt bottle again. Yeah, now's the time where if you want to be brave, you want to be bold, you want to break boundaries, go for it. Just understand that that beautiful list of features that you laid out, that you said that you were going to deliver, you now need to take 2 or 3 of those and move them over into stretch goals. Because you're now going to have to take that time to learn a new technology. And that's not time that your team will be productive building features. So if you want to stay safe and go with JavaScript or Ruby, totally fine. Nobody's going to fault you. Nobody's going to think less of you. What matters is that you are building an awesome product. If you want to try something different like PHP or Python or something else, we have the people that can help you. That's not a challenge. There will be mentor support for whatever it is you want to do. But just keep in mind that if you do take that choice, you are now changing your time management over the next few days. And then once you have picked a language, the next step is, are you going to use a framework? And if so, which one? Ruby has Sinatra, it has Rails, it has Hanami. There are a number of different frameworks that are available. You learned Rails. Node. Well, yes, you've done a lot with Express, and that's a comfortable pattern for you. But if you, for example, were to go to nodeframework.com, it's a site that is auto-generated based on stars on GitHub, and it automatically ranks the top Node frameworks based on what type of framework they are. And the ones that you're seeing there are the ones that the community has said, these are the best, by adding stars to it on GitHub. So it's a community-curated list of the best possible frameworks, whether you're building something Rails-like, whether you're building an API, whether you want something really crazy like Meteor or Derby, which are a whole different way to build an application. Or you could stick with Express, which is totally fine. Nobody's going to fault you for doing that if you build a good product. That's the key piece here. What do you want to build in that you feel you can build a great product with? What are the technologies that you want to come out of the bootcamp having? But please don't think that making a non-standard choice here or with your database or with a front-end framework is going to dramatically affect your employment in any way or your employability. It's not. Employers know what you are coming out of the bootcamp with, skill-wise, what technologies you have been exposed to in the bootcamp. That's what they are expecting out of you. And you can say, but if I prove that I can do something in another language, I'm standing out, amongst my colleagues. You are setting yourself apart. Standing out is up to you. So which one do you want to do? Stand apart or stand out? And that's a completely separate conversation. Don't make one of these choices just for employability reasons. Make it because it's a technology you really want to learn, something you're passionate about, and you think you can build a great product with. That's the reason to pick something different here. Yeah, our insurance doesn't cover that, so careful. All right. Calgary, there's a bit of comedy going on with the chair. We have given up and chosen a new chair. Hey, it gave me an excuse to drink coffee, so I'm good. All right. This is an area of planning where I see people make a mistake a lot. And that is the mistake is not doing enough planning here. You have to plan your routes. And especially at this point with the level of apps that you're going to build, you have to decide whether you're doing front end or back end for your routing. Because if you bring in something like React Router, which is an awesome library, all of your routing is going to be done on the front end. There are going to be no more back end routes unless you have AJAX routes. Your back end is entirely an API at that point. Different pages will be done strictly with what happens in the browser. There will be no more back end routes for each page. And if you don't understand how that works, you have to either say, yes, I'm willing to potentially take a feature and move it over to stretch goals so I can acquire this knowledge and this technology, or you go with something more traditional. So you have to know what is managing your routes. And definitely I recommend using RESTful conventions if you're going to be, if you've got an AJAX API, if you're building just a standard web app, whatever it happens to be, RESTful conventions make it easier. And the way I think about it is if models are nouns, routes are the verbs. These are the things that take action on your data. When you hit a route, you are doing one of your bread actions on your data at that point. That's the whole purpose of your routes. So make sure you know what your routes are. And the thing is, you can figure out your routes pretty easily by going back to your user stories. So as a user, I want to save a story I'm reading, /stories/ID, because I found it useful. Given that I'm reading a story, /stories/ID, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories, /stories/ID/save. And I can intuit from this that I'm going to have /stories/saved that is going to be my list of saved stories. I now know 3 routes I need to build. I can guess already that it's a get, a post, and a get for those 3 routes. Or the save story, that could actually be, we can get in the whole item potency thing and whether it's going to change multiple times. That could be a put. So I can make those decisions now, and I can decide what is the best way to design those routes. And then I have this nice list of routes that need to be built. And if I go through all my user stories and I compile this collated list of routes, looks a lot like a to-do list. Looks a lot like a task list for building this app. Because there's going to be a whole bunch of post routes that are going to be managing data, like put, post, patch routes, delete routes that are going to be deleting things. There's going to be a bunch of get routes where I'm going to have to run queries to fetch the data I need. Whoever's doing back end, ta-da, this is your to-do list. Wouldn't it be great to just know that ahead of time? And to be able to look at that and go, oh wow, we've overplanned because we have 73 routes all of a sudden. You'd want to know that now instead of a week in and suddenly going, what do you mean I've built 10 routes and I'm not even 10, I'm barely 10% done. Are you crazy? Like, that would be demoralizing to get a week in and suddenly find out that you've got to work like 6 times as hard to finish. Know it ahead of time, and then you can plan your time accordingly. The other thing is, if I was viewing this from a front-end capacity, I want to save a story I'm reading, so I know that there's going to be a view, a component for showing a story. And given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories, well, I know I'm going to be changing the state in the app that is the list of my saved stories, so that if I go back to the home view, I can now see that story in my saved stories list. And I know that when I tap that, it's going to be sending an AJAX request, which is going to set that data on the back end, so that the next time a query runs and actually loads that page, the state loads in with the stories that I have saved. So whether I'm doing front-end or back-end dev, I know how to manage the story now because I know what those routes look like. Third big piece of the puzzle, third piece of the trifecta. We had user stories, we had data design, and now we just have design. Wireframing, storyboarding, design is one big area that is critical. And this is a place where you will probably spend more time than you expect doing this before you ever put hands on keys to code. So, wireframing, what it is data hierarchy, it is navigation, it is proportion. It is arranging things on the page so that you know where the data points that you have chosen to collect are going to go. This is not about drawing out features. What this is setting up the hierarchy of the data that you have already planned. If you plan something in this wireframe and you don't have the data for it in your ERD, you have to take it off of here, or you have to ask yourself the very important question, do I need this feature? Do I need to go back and write a user story for it? Do I need to plan it out in my ERD? Because if otherwise, I'm inventing things here in my wireframes that I've never planned for anywhere else in my app. And it's better to find that out now than when you're halfway through building the page and going, well, where's the table that I'm getting this data from? And everybody's like, /shrug in Slack is now the most important thing that you can send to your team. Exactly. So when you're doing your wireframes, it should be done as a team, and you should be sitting down and actually doing a comparison. Where does this data from? Where's this image going to come from? Where are we going to load this from? And if there's anything here that doesn't match up in your ERD, figure out either we're playing Wouldn't It Be Cool If all of a sudden, or that's something that we really need and we need to go back and do the planning to make sure that this can show up where we need it to show up. Great wireframes demonstrate the UI and UX. So if you're going to have interactivity states where you're going to have like a modal that comes up, do a wireframe for that page that shows the modal. Shows how big it should be, shows where it should be positioned, shows what goes into that modal. Because otherwise, if I go to Ben and I'm like, hey Ben, build a modal, he's going to be like, okay. And he's not going to know what my vision for that is. And I'll get a modal, and I'll probably be like, well, why'd you build it that way? And he said, because you told me to. And I'll say, no, I didn't. And then we'll argue, and it'll be terrible. And the whole team will be mad, and everybody will like message Don to get him to play dad and resolve the dispute. Don't do that, by the way. Don, actually, if you do need to message me, please do so. It's more important that you're productive. I just joke because I do play dad. So yeah, the great wireframes line up with the user stories, and they define the interactions clearly. So if you look at this one here, one of the things that it has, you'll notice, is this is planning flights. And it's got a fly out and a fly back right in the middle with a little calendar icon next to it. What would you expect to happen when you tap that calendar icon? A calendar is going to come up. Well, if I don't know what that's going to look like, am I going to reinvent the calendar? Am I going to use the one on the phone here? Is it going to be one of the wheel ones, like one of the scrolling ones? Is it going to be an actual calendar? What's that going to look like? Mayan calendar. Yeah, there we go. I have to like angle my phone in the sun to pick a date. So yeah, it's you've got to figure out what those interactivity points are going to look like, so that when somebody does get to the point of development that they're building this, they know what they're building. This is what not to do. This is wireframes that hate white space. White space is your friend. White space makes things legible. You know, if you compare the amount of space that's around the, how things are lined up and the way it's spaced out here versus this is horrible. This is one page. Yeah. 1998 called, they'd like their GeoCities back. This is somebody's MySpace page, right? It's got every feature that has ever existed. It's got a breadcrumb, it's got buttons, it's got a video embed, it's got a sign up, it's got a ticker of star rating, social sharing, a gallery at the bottom. This is clearly done by somebody who didn't like to leave any space unfilled, and so they invented features until it was filled. Please, don't do this. Like, this is the wrong way to approach wireframing. Picasso has the great quote that a piece of art is not done when there's no more left to add, it's when there's no more left to take away. That brings us to storyboarding. So you're going to go through, do your wireframes so that you have a good sense of what the layout of the pages are going to be. Keep in mind, you don't need to do wireframes, most likely, for post routes. Just gets the different views of your application. Once you have those wireframes, then you're going to need to storyboard them. In storyboarding, if you've ever read Dilbert or XKCD or any webcomic, you've seen a storyboard. It is snapshot views over time that tell a story. And it's something that directors of TV shows and plays and movies will do before they ever get to the point of putting people on a stage to have them perform it, is they will map out what the key points are going to be and how you move from one to the other. Well, guess what? We get to do that as well. We get to do that as well because we have these wireframes. We want to know what order we want the user to go through. There is a very clear workflow in everybody's app that you should do. You can't post a new story, for example, until you sign up. So sign up should go before posting a new story. But you might be able to read stories before you sign up, so that could go first. You know, if somebody clicks on this button, does it lead them to a sign-up page, or does it lead them to something else? If you start using mock-up apps like InVision or Mockingbird or a few others that are out there, you can actually do hotspots in your wireframes that allow you to click from view to view. But let me tell you from experience, it is way better to figure out now what order you want things to go in than to link up all of those pages and have buttons and click actions and hrefs and everything that point from one place to the next, and suddenly go, oh crap, these are all in the wrong order. Oh, I've built it and now I have to go back and rebuild it and find every place that I sent somebody to this page and change it to something different. Guaranteed you will miss one. It happens. You're human. Don't put yourself in that position and plan it out the first time. And then guess what? You can start this off with your user stories. Post-it notes, literally on a whiteboard. Figure out what order features should be consumed in, and then build the wireframes, and then figure out how to link them together. And then we get to the design portion. Now, one of the quotes I like to share here is, doing development without a design is like doing origami blindfolded. Yes, you will get folded paper. It will not be a pretty crane. If you don't know what the thing you're building looks like, how do you build it? And I see people do things where they will waste time and they will build out some dummy page for testing the data. Oh, well, I want to see if the API works. Have you heard of the command line? You know, you don't have to build a page to show your data, because then that's just a page that you're going to have to go back and unbuild later and rebuild as something else. The other thing is people will start doing HTML and they'll be like, oh, well, I'll just put the layout in here later. I just want something up on the page that I can see. So you want to write code that you literally are going to have to throw away later on. That's a waste of time. Figure out what your page is going to look like through the wireframing, through the storyboarding, through the actual design process of like colors and fonts and all those things, and then build that version. Anything else that you want to know, whether functions work, whether data is coming in the right way, you have a command line for that. You can write a script to do that and show it in the terminal. You don't, you know, your data isn't going to change based on whether you show it in blue or green. So doing markup for that is extra time that you're spending that you could be spending on better things. Now the design matters. The colors matter. The font choices matter. The layout matters. How many columns your website has. How it behaves responsively. These things all matter 100%. There's a great big however, though. See, great big however. Um, the thing is, we're training you to be devs, not designers. Nobody expects you to do something that is straight out of Emily Carr art and design school. That's not what we are expecting from you. So that's why we advocate using resources like Dribbble, Folio Focus, Smashing Magazine, Behance. Go to the design sites. Go find sites like the one you are trying to build and be digitally inspired. I will tell you with 100% confidence, there's no markup police that are going to come storming out of the elevator because you used a layout similar to another site. It's like every website ever has the big banner at the top and the orange bar with a misattributed quote and then 3 columns and then a button to sign up and then 3 more columns and a footer with social media links. Every website ever has that. And nobody is saying, oh, you stole my layout. Doesn't happen. We can see everybody's layout and everybody's CSS. We don't need to think that we're stealing it. Worst case scenario, go find a WordPress theme, strip out the PHP, and replace it with EJS or ERB. That's your worst case scenario. Ta-da, your layout's done. This should not be the thing that keeps you from making progress. Yes, there's a reason financial sites are green and food sites are red and yellow and social media sites are blue, and there's a reason those colors get picked. So go look at what sites like what you are building do. Go look at sites that you like and see how they lay out things. Do they have nav bars? Do they have sidebars? How many columns are they presenting their content in? Be inspired by those things. Downright copy them if you need to, but don't let this be the thing that keeps you from making progress. You may decide to do this first and then do your wireframing once you know what your layouts are going to look like. Totally fine. Doesn't matter what order you do it in. What matters is that you're doing it. Plan out where things are going to go based on the layout you have picked. And if your layout doesn't work for the type of data that you want to show, fail fast. Be willing to change your layout in order to present the data the right way. Don't compromise the way you want to present the data because you picked a layout that does something different. Change the layout. You have the ability to do that. So, UI frameworks. You're still not ready to code. You're closer, but you're not ready to code yet. And there's a few UI frameworks out there. 1 or 2 of them you've probably heard of before. And you may or may not want to use one of these. When it came to the midterm project, we encouraged you to use either Bootstrap or Foundation because those are skills that you need to have coming out of the boot camp to have worked with one of those at least once. But you've now had lots of time to work on your CSS since then. I know all of you love CSS so much. And you may decide that you don't need one of these and you're going to do it from scratch. And quite frankly, you have time. You have the time to put in to change, everything that you might want to do and design everything that you may want to do and do the CSS from scratch. You may want to take on something like CSS Grid or Flexbox and use that for your layouts. You don't need the grid framework. Totally fine. In fact, I would kind of encourage that. But you may want to say, I don't want to have to think about that stuff. I'm going to have enough to think about with my business logic, so I'm going to use a grid framework. Be open to using ones other than Bootstrap and Foundation, though they do everything for you and are responsive out of the box. For example, Skeleton and Min are very small. They just provide the grid framework, maybe a little typography, a little form styling. Bulma is Flexbox based and is a full CSS framework, but it is Flexbox based. Black Hole is Bootstrap, but it's Sass based, so it has all the same bells and whistles that Bootstrap does, but it's built with Sass modules. Bourbon and Neat are also Sass. The quality of that code is a little bit better than Black Hole, but Black Hole is still good. Groundwork, I think, has the best CSS framework and the worst colors and forms I've ever seen. But the grid framework in it is really good. And pure CSS, people either love it or hate it. It is a swear by or swear at framework. And if the people who love it do outstanding things with it, and the people who hate it want it to die in a fire. So you can just Google and see what's out there. I mean, there's a new one of these released every other day. So find one that you feel like you can be productive with. Find one that gives you the features that you want to have, gives you the type of layouts that you want to have. See if it's going to be painful to use the markup that they want, and then go with it. The one thing I will say is if you do choose to use a framework, once you commit to one, stay committed to it. Changing from one framework to another is not easy. You're basically having to scrap your layout and redo it, like throw away your view files and rebuild them, because the markup needs change so differently from one framework to another. So midterms, this was not a conversation we could have because you hadn't learned React yet. You'd barely done jQuery. So we didn't have to talk about front-end frameworks for your midterm project. You're still not ready to code yet for your final, but you may be wanting to make a decision in this area. And once again, there are many of them. You have learned React, but there's Angular, there's Ember, there's Aurelia, there's Inferno, there's Meteor, there's Vue, there's a whole bunch of different ones. And you may want to choose one of these because you think people are going to respect you more. You may want to choose one of these because you think it's going to make you more employable. You may want to choose one of these because you read a cool blog post about one of them and you think it might be fun to play with. The third one is the only reason out of those three that's worthy of picking one of these. It is not going to make you more employable. You're not required to use one on your final project. No one's going to think you are less cool if you don't have one in there, because what matters is the quality of the product. There's nothing that you can do in these that you can't do in jQuery. So it's up to you as to what you feel most productive with. If you feel like you can build the best user experience in React or Angular or Ember, fantastic, go for it. If you feel like the best product you're going to build is just going to use straight up jQuery, great, do it. But build a good product either way. Keep in mind that as soon as you decide that you're going to do a single page app framework, the structure of your project changes. Your backend becomes an API. You stop having view files as much on the back end, and everything is about serving up JSON. RESTful conventions really help. The other thing I'll say is that please make sure this is a team decision, not someone just going, well, I'm doing the front end, so we're doing it in Angular, and that's just the way it is. Because everybody on the team is going to have to touch that code and understand that code at some point. And if you make an arbitrary decision like that, nobody's going to be happy. So make sure this is a team decision. Because if you don't, this is how you're going to feel. So let's take the scenario where you have now chosen Python because you want to learn a new backend language. And you're using CouchDB that, because that one sounds really cool. All the views are in JavaScript. And you're going to use Django, which you've never, as the framework, because you've never worked with that one before. Oh, and on the front end, you've heard that this thing over here is kind of like React, and you know React, so you're going to use that. So you're going to use Inferno. So now you have like 4 new, and you're going to deploy on AWS. So now you've got like 5 new technologies that you have to learn before you can write your first line of code. So now you're going to take like 10 of your features, and you're going to move them over into your stretch goals. And ask yourself, is what is over here on the I'm going to deliver this side still an MVP of your product? This is where you will be if you go down that path. Don't make it harder for yourself than you need to. Pick and choose your challenges wisely. Let's talk about Git. You remember Git? You remember week 1, day 1? You remember talking about it before your midterm project? For the junior cohort that's now listening in, even though they're trying to act like they're not listening in. Well, on week 1, day 1, we talked about how it was important to learn the Git workflow because it was going to be required of you as a professional dev. And we went through things like branching and pushing and pulling and how to check out and clone and all those kinds of things, how to resolve conflicts. And then you did a Git collaboration exercise before your midterm project. And then, of course, you did your midterm project. And lots of you had some fun Git adventures at that point. Some were successful, some weren't. And there was that moment of like, yeah, I probably should work on that. So I'm going to stand up here and I'm going to say I'm absolutely sure that since the midterm project, all of you have been following immaculate Git practices. If I was to look at the repos on any of your projects, there'd be this beautiful branching tree that shows every feature developed in its own branch, and nobody ever, went through and coded the entire thing on the master branch, and that, no conflicts and all of that. I'm sure it's going to be perfect. But just in case you want a refresher, one of the things we actually advocate for the final projects is instead of using the Git workflow where everything goes through a central repo on GitHub that everybody pushes and pulls from, that you use the GitHub workflow, and this is where forks and pull requests come in. And so I'm gonna choose Benji because he's sitting here on the couch. Actually, Benji, Sebastian, and I, we're now going to work on a project together. No offense. I was just looking at him, and Sebastian was right there. So, but the way this would work is one of us would start off. Let's say Sebastian starts off, and he makes the first repo. He gets the initial skeleton of the app up to his repo. Benji and I are going to go into GitHub, and we're going to fork Sebastian's repo. So we now each have our own copy of it that is a fork of his. And then once we're all ready to code, we're all going to code against our own repositories. We're going to make branches. We're going to push things up. Things get merged into master when they work, when we've tested them. And then at the point where we're ready to collaborate and merge code in, let's say Benji's done with the login feature, he's going to go to Sebastian's, he's pushed all his code up to his, so he's going to go to Sebastian's, and he's going to create a pull request. And that is a request for Sebastian to pull from Benji's repository into Sebastian's. And we can do this because the pull request says that these two repositories are on the same project, but this one has things that this one doesn't. And it's just a request to do a git pull from one repo to another, from a different type of remote. And so the cool thing is, as a team at that point, when Benji puts in that pull request, all three of us can now sit down and do code review and decide, is that code ready to be merged into the project? Does it do everything that we said that the login feature was going to do? We can look at the user story. We can look at the wireframe. We can check out that branch and see if it works the way we expect it to. We can look at the code. And if all three of us agree that, yes, checkmark, that's ready to go, Sebastian approves the pull request, and now that we have that feature merged into the main app. And if Sebastian finishes the feature, he can do a pull request against his own repository. And then we sit down and we review his code, and we realize that he hasn't refactored yet, and he left a whole bunch of console.logs in, and he hasn't commented anything. Terrible, terrible. What'd you learn in the last 7 weeks, man? And so Benji and I respectfully, professionally say, hey, Sebastian, why don't you clean this up a little bit, and then we can get this merged in. That was the respectfully and professionally part. And this mimics the open source contribution workflow. If you were ever going to contribute to Rails or to Express or to some obscure NPM module that 3 people have ever used ever, but you still want to contribute to it, this is the workflow you're going to follow. So it's a good time to practice it, because this is also the workflow that a lot of dev shops will use, where the senior dev will be the gatekeeper for the repository. You'll have your own fork of it, and you'll make pull requests when you are submitting code. Well, okay, so the question is, are we merging your forked master into the original master, or are we just merging a feature? Theoretically, on your master branch, on your GitHub, it's going to be the working version of the product, including the feature that you have just added. So the pull request will be from master to master. Because if Sebastian's working on stuff, he's going to have his code in his own branch. It's not going to be in master until it's been approved in a pull request to go from that branch to master. And we've reviewed it. So that's the workflow. If you want to go and use the same workflow that you used in the midterm project, that's totally cool. I'm saying here's another option for you, and this is one that you will also need to learn. Now is a great time to practice. Because the idea of doing code review on each other's code is not something that's going to cost you time. You have the time to do it. Yeah. Yep. So, okay, so the question is when the pull request gets approved and it's merged into master on Joe's GitHub, how does everybody else on the team get that? You can actually just do a get pull at that point from that remote one and pull it into yours, and you've got the code. Yes. Right, because all of your code would be in its own branch, so there won't be any conflicts. Well, your new code will have already gone up into Joe's master in this case, because that pull request took code from your repository and merged it into there. If anything, you're just now getting your master in sync with what's on Joe's. And in the case where we've got 15 days, so Sebastian starts out, and let's say for the first 5 days, he's the gatekeeper. And then on day 6, Benji is now the gatekeeper, and we start making pull requests against his. And because all 3 of the repos are in sync, it doesn't matter. And then, he's days 6 through 10, and days 11 through 15, it's me. So that way we can practice being that gatekeeper on all sides of it, practice submitting the pull request, practice writing up, hey, here's what I actually submitted, as opposed to ASDF JKL semicolon, which is, everybody's favorite commit. But this is, there's tons of resources online. There's good YouTube videos when YouTube works. And there's plenty of ways that you can learn more about this. I'm opening it up as an option. And please, if after 7.5 weeks you have any affection left for me at all, please do yourself the favor of observing the protocol of not coding everything on master. Please use branches. Please observe a good Git workflow. This is literally your last chance to practice this before you hit the world of employment. It is not something that you wait until day 1 of your job and go, okay, now I'm going to figure out this Git thing. That's a great way to lose your job pretty quick. So, we're close. You are almost ready to code. We are at the point of scaffolding now. And you're going to start off and you're going to do pair programming for this. This is something the whole team needs to sit down and do together. Set up the first repository. Either add collaborators or do forks or whatever it is you want to do. Download and install all the resources you're going to use. That means all the NPM modules, all the Ruby gems, all the pip libraries, PHP Composer, whatever it may be. If you're going to be using React, are you doing it with Create React App or the React Rails gem? Are you going to be using an NPM module to bring React into your app? Are you using Electron or React Native or GraphQL or whatever other libraries you are choosing to bring in to work with your application? Download and install them. Make sure that you know how to install them. Make sure you have read the directions on how to install them. Make sure that everyone is sitting around you while you are installing it, because if there are any problems, it's likely that you're going to have problems on other people's computers as well. And the whole team can mob program and figure out how to solve that problem so that they're going to know how to fix it on their machines. This is not something where, Alethea just goes off and does all the installs and pushes it up to GitHub and goes, screw you guys, I'm done. Mine works, good luck. Because she wouldn't do that, because she's nice. Right? If you're going to be using things like Bootstrap, Foundation, jQuery, even React in certain cases, use CDN links, use hosted versions of things, because that way there's a good chance that it's going to be cached on users' machines. It's just a best practice. And then here's the most important part, and the thing that most people forget, is once you get all these modules installed, once you've gone through all the, getting the requires in there in the right place, once you have all those things in your repository make sure you can actually load your app the first time, that Rails S or npm start works and loads that first initial, welcome to Express or you've got Rails or whatever the first page is. Make sure that works, because if that doesn't work, you're not ready to start building your app yet. You're not going to build a house on a broken foundation. Don't do it with your application either. If it doesn't work, as a team, figure out how to fix it, because it's the same problem that's going to exist on everyone's machine. So make sure you know how to get everything up and running first before you start coding. And the other thing is, when everybody gets this code on their machine, as a team, troubleshoot everybody's machine, and you will get better and faster at it. It's good DevOps practice. And then only once it's running on everybody's machine, then you get to decide on team responsibilities. Then you get to the point that you can actually start coding, because you're practically ready to code at this point. Your fingers are hovering over the keys, itching, ready to write. So I'd love to be able to tell you that I have this silver bullet formula for how tasks should be divided up, but it doesn't exist, because every team on every project is different. And with the midterm, you had the opportunity to go to your team and say, hey, you know what, not feeling too great about databases, can I own that part of this project? I really want to work on my CSS. I know, Bob over here, he's really good at CSS, but I need to get better at it. Can I, kind of run point on that, and maybe you can support me? You have that opportunity in your midterms, and it's an even bigger opportunity now, because this is now your safe space. This is now the last time you have in boot camp to practice any and all of the skills that you have learned that you are bringing into this app. If you're doing something with WebSockets and you're not comfortable with how WebSockets work and you feel like you just kind of skated by on Chatty, well, now's the time to practice your WebSockets. Now's the time to self-identify to your team, here's what I'm really good at, and I'm happy to help anybody working on it. Here's the things that I really need to work on, because I need to come out of this course with a certain set of skills at a certain level. Now's the time to be honest with yourself about what you're capable of doing and figure out where you need to do some work. And you've got 2 weeks to do it. There's no single skill that you have had in this boot camp that we've given you 2 weeks to work on. You now have 2 weeks to make sure that the skills you're not comfortable with, you have time to be comfortable when you graduate. You want to be able to stand up at demo day and say, yes, I know how to work with APIs, I know how to do WebSockets, I know how to write JavaScript, I know how to write active record queries, I know SQL, I know NoSQL, I know all these things, I'm ready to go. So, as a team, decide responsibilities. Figure out who's going to work on what. People, because you have 2 weeks, each person on the team, people will have multiple jobs. One of the things that's particularly effective is deciding responsibilities by feature. You've got 25 user stories, for example. Say, okay, I'm going to do this user story. That means you're owning the front end, the back end, all the routing, the design of it, like everything. And if you have to work with somebody on that design because it's part of another page, fantastic, you get to collaborate. I will say it as many times as I can, and nobody ever believes me. If you decide that everything for your final project is going to be pair programmed, you are not wasting time. You have enough time to pair program everything. And if that's the way that you want to approach it, 2 heads are always better than 1 for solving a problem. Having somebody own all the database stuff, like the migrations and the main queries and things like that, is not a bad thing if somebody isn't feeling confident with that. I also recommend that if you're working with an API, it doesn't matter what it is, Google Maps, Amazon, Yelp, IMDb, whatever, having one person who is kind of the main lead on that API and knows it better is a good thing. Because with APIs, since you're dealing with somebody else's architecture, having a whole bunch of people who know 10% of it is not as good as having one person who knows like 70% of it. You will make way more progress in that situation. At the end of the day, you're going to find what works for your team. Congratulations. Now you are ready to code. Now you have a clear path to what you are going to build. Now you know what it's going to look like, how the data is going to interact, what technologies you're going to use, and you have a clean working dev environment that you can start to code in. Now you're ready to code. So when you get to front end, and almost everyone in this room will touch the front end at some point, start with static pages first, even if you are doing React. Literally just make an HTML file. This is the perfect case for one of Joel's WTF files. Yes, Joel's happy I referenced his WTF files. This is the perfect case, WTF index.html. And build your layout, build your wireframe in just HTML and CSS first. Because if it doesn't work there, it's not going to work in React. It's not going to work when you load it from a view with EJS or ERB. You have to make sure your CSS works by itself, responsively, probably, please, before you try anything else. Because otherwise, it's not going to get easier when it's dynamic. Decide on how you're going to name classes and IDs now. Please remember the piece of advice that I always give to people with CSS, which is you probably don't need as many classes and IDs as you have used. Specificity is your friend. Less CSS is more effect. And always start from the outside and troubleshoot in. Deciding on class and ID nomenclature, you're going to have classes and IDs, especially if you're binding events to it or things like that. But it's a team process because you might be doing the layout, but somebody else might be writing those event handlers. If the IDs and classes don't make sense, that's friction in your team you don't need. You could take 5 minutes and have a conversation about it and save all the grief. When you are first building out your layouts, use placeholders. Phil Murray, Lorem Ipsum text. If you haven't been to meettheipsums.com yet, go to meettheipsums.com and it has all the filler text in every flavor you could ever want. Placehold it, placeholder.com, Phil Murray, PlaceKitten. There's a whole bunch of image placeholders. Start building with those. Don't worry about having to have real data to do your layout with. Especially if you're pulling data from an API or getting users to submit data, guess what? You're not in control of it anyway. So you might as well use a third-party service that will give you an image of the size that you asked for. So this is a great way to solve the problem of being able to scaffold things out. And this is one of the most important. Try your layouts with different quantities of data. As humans, we have a confirmation bias. We only like to see the things that we build work. We don't like to see our stuff break. Well, in order to find out if it's going to break, you have to break it. And if you're dealing with third-party data, whether it's from an API or user-generated content, you can't guarantee that they're going to give you the perfect size title or the perfect size image every time. So try out your layouts with smaller images, bigger images, longer titles, shorter titles, and see what happens. You can do some awesome things with CSS to solve the problems now, rather than having to wait for getting bad data and going, oh, I didn't think about that. An extra half hour spent playing with bad data and fixing the CSS to accommodate it will save you hours of troubleshooting later when it's now in a dynamic setting and you're dealing with all the other components around it. Do the work now. Save yourself the grief. When you get to the back end, always start with your data models. Always. Because if they don't work, none of the rest of the stuff matters. Write your callbacks and validations first. Like that should be the first code that you write for the back end, is the callbacks and validations for your data. If your data isn't protected, if it doesn't respond the way it's supposed to, nothing else is going to work the way you anticipate it to work. Make sure it works in the CLI before trying to make it work in your app. Literally, just fire up the Node REPL or Rails C or run whatever you're running from the command line, and require in whatever files you need to make that database connection and test your queries there. Like Rails C is already going to have them all required in. If it doesn't work in the CLI, it's not going to work in your app. So spec out your queries and test them and make sure you're getting the data you want first, then move it into controllers or business logic or wherever that code is eventually going to live, And that's a great way for you to iterate and practice and sandbox out the code that you're writing, and especially when you're testing things like helper functions. Because otherwise you are changing the helper function, saving the file, closing, control C'ing your app, restarting your app, going back, loading the page, putting in the data, just lather, rinse, repeat over and over and over, whereas in the CLI, just redefine the function. Problem solved. Code atomically. For 7.5 weeks, we've been telling you to refactor, to not make big, huge monolithic methods, to learn to recognize patterns like map and filter and select and detect and things like that. Use all those skills. Just because it's a bigger app doesn't give you a license to write bad code. Well, I've got so many user stories I have to do. Calm down, breathe. You have time. Be smart with your time and take the time you need to make a product that you're willing to put your name on and put in front of an employer. The clock should not be your biggest worry. The quality of the product should. Last topic, communication. This is what makes or breaks a final project. Your midterm was 5 days long. Yes, it spanned over one weekend. And those of you that didn't work in the same space on the weekend probably found how important communication was. Communication over a 2-week span absolutely will make or break a team. There are many, many tools available. Slack is an easy choice because you're already in a Slack network. Telegram, WhatsApp, Hangouts, Skype, smoke signals, Morse code, semaphore flags. I don't care what it is. Just pick one and stick to it and use it. And commit to using it as the way that you update each other when you're not sitting together about what's going on. Use it to share links to documentation, troubleshooting resources. Hey, here's that front-end library I've decided to include. Paste. Here's the link to the documentation for it in case anybody else has to touch it. That's the kind of thing that your Slack group is going to be great for. The other thing, use Trello or some other project management tool. There's a number of really good ones out there. There's Pivotal Tracker. There's Jira that you can get a 30-day free trial of. There's Trax. There's Asana. There's so many good ones out there. This is another communication tool. This is also where you're going to build in some professional accountability for yourself. Because at a glance in Trello, you can tell who's working on what the status is, and this is the other thing that you have to commit to doing above and beyond writing code. Because I can guarantee you, when you get a job, one of the very first things you're going to get is a login to whatever project management tool they're using, and you're going to be expected to just know how to use it out of the gate. So you have to be comfortable using one coming out of this program. Trello's free. If you don't know how to use Trello, come see me. I will give you the 10-minute how to use Trello quick start that will get you started and show you some really cool stuff you can do with Trello, and I'm happy to do it. I can even show you examples of companies that are using Trello right now quite productively. This is one of your communication tools, and this is one of the most important communication tools if, for example, in week 10 or over weekends, your team is not in the same place at the same time. This is, even if you end up getting on a plane and flying to Moncton, New Brunswick, for whatever reason, you can still communicate about what you're working on and show the status of all your tasks. As a team, you will have to make the decision that, yes, you're going to take that extra hour to convert all of your user stories to tasks on Trello. One user story, pardon me, might break down into multiple tasks. Because there might be a front-end part, a back-end part, a database part, some DevOps parts. There might be multiple things, and that's a good thing to know, because it means that you've now separated all those responsibilities out, and each one is now a task. All those routes you planned out, make them Trello cards. The standard is to have 3 columns: to do, doing, and done. Everything that's yet to be done goes into to do. When you are working on it, you drag it over into doing, and it's assigned to you. When you're done with it, guess what? It goes in the done column. So, yeah, if you don't know how to use Trello, please come see me. I'll be happy to show you. And that's all I've got for talking about the planning. You'll notice that I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the actual coding. You already know how to do that. That's not I don't have to teach you that anymore. A couple things I will add just for context. Today being a perfect example. Please keep in mind that although you're now in final projects, there are still lectures every day. They still start at 9 every day. For the rest of this week and all of next week, the expectation is still that you are going to be here in lecture at 9 o'clock. Because we still will be giving references to employers about your punctuality starting in just a couple weeks. What do you want us to be saying about you? How do you want us to remember you? Second thing I'll say is the communication piece is incredibly important because projects like this get stressful when people bring in a lot of expectations that don't necessarily have the right place here. Yes, your final project is what you're going to be showing to employers as an example of what you're capable of delivering. But the final project is the product of the entire team's work. The employer can go and do a git blame in GitHub and see who worked on what. So that you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about it matching your grand vision. What matters is that you've demonstrated that you can work as a team and deliver a good product. That's what they're going to be hiring you for. Don't worry about who's in charge. You're a team. You don't need to have a project manager for this project. As a team, you can share the responsibility of making sure that it gets done. But you can also hold each other accountable in a polite, professional way. If somebody's not holding up their end and not, delivering what they said they were going to deliver, figure out how to talk to them. Figure out how to deal with that like adults. And if there's something that you can't deal with, Joel and I are always happy to sit down and listen and help and do everything we can to get your team back on track. But this is an opportunity to practice all those soft skills as well. The communication skills, the coaching skills, the checking in on your teammates. One of the best conference talks I've ever seen in my life came from a senior UX designer at Netflix who didn't talk about the cool JavaScript things they do to build the UX of Netflix. He didn't talk about how they stream video content. He gave a talk about how you have to care for your teammates and how checking in with people, seeing if they're tired, if you see their code quality starting to dip, check in with them, make sure they're feeling okay. Being willing to say, like, you know what, yeah, go crash on the couch and take a nap for an hour. We'll keep soldiering on because we need you in better shape than you are right now. If somebody's feeling stressed out, you don't tell them to just suck it up. You talk with them. You share their concern and their worry, and you see what you can do to get them back on track. This is your opportunity to practice all of those skills. Be willing to do it. Like, that's going to mean way more, and you're going to come out as a better team, better professional, and have a better product than if you're just like, well, this is all about me, and I just happen to be working with you guys because they told us we had to be in a group. That's not the way to approach your final project. You may have any questions. I tried. One thing that will happen is I think Hillary will send out a spreadsheet that we're going to need each team to fill out. It's going to be where you list, for example, who's on the team. Once you figured out what tech stack you're going to be working with, a description, like just a short 2 or 3 paragraph description of what you're building. If you've already decided on a name for it, awesome. But we use that for marketing side to build out the Eventbrite page that's going to have people, RSVPing for demo day. So we can, highlight what products are going to be shown. And yeah, it can change. It's totally fine. But we also use it for career services so that we know like what tech is going to be represented. And that helps us to invite the right employers to employer-only demo day that are likely to be interested in those technologies. Don't worry about what employers are out there. Worry about what you're going to build. Our job is to figure out the other piece of that. Don't build to chase an employer. Build to build a great product. Calgary, how are you folks doing? I haven't heard anything from you, so. I got a thumbs up from Dave, so we're good. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, definitely I'm around all day. One last expectation I'll set is I talked about a lot of planning that each team's going to have to do. If you're not coding before Friday morning, you're not behind. Be willing to take a day and a half, like a good solid day and a half, and do the planning that you need to do to make sure your team knows what's going to get built. That will save you time later on. So don't think that if you get to like even Friday afternoon and you're not coding yet, that you're behind. Don't worry about being behind. Worry about being prepared. Cool. Good luck, guys.